amidst US political shadows. My name is Layla Mackenzie Dallas, and I'm the founder and CEO of Dial Global. And we're hosting this very special webinar today amongst some true titans of industry because we have had overwhelming questions and requests, not only from our members and our clients, but also from our community in response to what is not only happening in the States, but some of the geopolitical tensions that we've seen over the last 6, 9, 12 months. I recall there was a moment when I was giving a keynote over in Rome and there were 70 elections going on around the globe at the time. And I thought, oh my goodness, if not now, then when, to really look at how we're able to continue pivoting, continuing being tenacious, and ensure that we all move the dial in the right direction when it comes to all aspects of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, and culture. We're going to be unpacking some of the challenges and some of the opportunities today in what is an incredibly fast-paced and evolving world. In summary, and before we dive deep, we've seen some recent geopolitical events that have significantly impacted DEI, which seems to be a word of the moment that is back and forth in the headlines. Over in the States, we've seen Trump's administration actively targeting DEI policies, issuing exec orders to dismantle some of these programs with federal agencies. I heard someone say the other day that when America gets the flu, that the UK and Europe get a cold. And certainly there are these ripple effects that we have seen, not only when it comes to those within underrepresented communities, but also the impact that we're feeling here in the UK. The team and I at Dial Global, a number of us are over in the UK, but we're also joined by some wonderful individuals from the States and real global citizens. As the ecosystems and some of the business world and operating models continue to transform, we're starting to see some more highly sophisticated, data-driven emphasis on strategic talent. And some of the diversity of this talent we're seeing is really going to create a competitive edge. I personally believe this is a bit of a watershed moment for diversity, inclusion, belonging. At Dial Global, we've always taken this holistic approach through our 10 facet methodology around what we call holistic diversity, when it comes to supporting, working closely with a number of different stakeholder groups, which is increasing as well. That's everyone from board CEOs, CHROs, chief diversity officers, social impact advocates, and employee resource groups and voluntary communities. I think it's really important for us to remember that diversity has got a different meaning and a different approach within different geographies. And whilst equity and inclusion carry more of a universal meaning, this is something that means different things in different places. On a personal note, diversity to me is intersectionality. The brief story that I will tell to you all about myself is that I'm Chinese. I was adopted by white British parents. I'm married to a white American Greek, and although I am Chinese, I can't speak a word of Chinese, unfortunately. My white American husband, who is from Idaho, for those of us tuning in from the States, it's a very, very red state. And I dare say, because I'm amongst friends here, I used to tell a slight diversity joke that was, don't worry, my husband doesn't support Trump, but now it's not so funny. On that note, we're going to unpack some of the things that we've seen. We're going to unpack some of the headlines. And I'd really like to introduce some of our wonderful speakers for today. A dear friend and someone who I have admired and I have followed for a very long time indeed, Vinay Myers. Vinay is the founder and CEO of the Vinay Myers Company. She was also formerly the VP for inclusion from Netflix. Vinay, I'd love to welcome you to tell us a little bit more about what you're seeing when it comes to some of the recent headlines and backlash.
Thank you, Leila. Hello, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be here with you all. You know, the acronyms, we've got the DEI, which I'm now actually purposefully, as a result of having a webinar like this before and hearing one of my speakers saying, let's start saying diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, let's start saying the words, because clearly the acronym has been completely distorted and created just a monster. So we've got the DEI, but now we've also got Elon Musk and the president and a few other detractors of DEI advocating for MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence, right? And then, of course, we have people who are like, oh no, I'm going to hold on to DEI as in definitely earned it, right? So there is the war here that's going on. And I have to say that what is most problematic for me, and there's so many problematic things in this last 3 weeks, maybe, it's moving so quickly. It's almost like, you're sort of getting whiplash. But the thing that kind of blows my mind, and maybe it shouldn't, I know a bunch of people are like, well, he said he was going to do this, but I'm still surprised that someone would use their power to take down the incredible, positive, evolving, moral work that we have been doing, many of us, for so long when it comes to DEI. And the rationale that is being used for dismantling all of the policies, the practices, and the interventions that have been sponsored by diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives and the field itself. And let's remember, this field has developed from the Civil Rights Act of 1965 and 64 and Title VII and so forth. These have been like the bedrock of the US, right? It's us sort of actually realizing on our ideals and our principles of equity and freedom. Well, the big rationale for taking it down are very familiar to me as a person who has been practicing this work for more than 30 years, is colorblindness, which I thought we had gotten over. Like I thought, and then when they bring out Martin Luther King to just help them rationalize this, you're like, no, King did not say, don't pay attention to my color. He said, basically, don't use my color against me. That's really what he was trying to say in his I Have a Dream speech. But the idea is in these people's minds that race, gender, sexual orientation, none of these identities should ever be used or calculated when an organization is making any kind of decisions. And then the second narrative that is old and ugly is that somehow whatever you're doing to level the playing field, right, to address the kinds of obstacles and exclusion and the kind of bias and bigotry that has happened in the past that is responsible for the unlevel playing field, is that you're lowering standards somehow. And again, I thought, I've been at this work for so long, I thought I had helped people understand that we're not lowering standards. DEI is removing obstacles so that people can bring their full and capable selves. And so this idea of merit, I'm all for it. I mean, who isn't for merit? I remember a lot of my clients used to say to me, we believe in meritocracy. We have a meritocracy here, and I would come back with the assessment that I did, and I was like, yeah, there are only a few people in your meritocracy, right? So we have a lot of studies that suggest, and in fact, I just had an op-ed published with my colleague and Joan Williams and at the Equity Action Center. And what we said is we're all for merit, but apparently the only people who are actually experiencing merit are the people who you're saying are being disadvantaged by DEI. There's no proof of that. All the studies for any of the practitioners who've gone into workplaces or for people who are in those roles, and whether they're in HR or whether they're in diversity, equity, inclusion, you know that every survey, every cultural audit you do, that the people who are having the most fun, feeling the most opportunity, feeling that things are pretty equal for them and their access is positive are, for the most part, white men. So we have studies that would suggest that 91 to 95% of people who are satisfied with their workplace happen to be white men, right? And those sometimes are compared to, in fact, sometimes you're looking at the statistics or the cultural audit and you're like, okay, these are two different companies. Like the women are feeling this way, the men are feeling this way. The people of color are feeling this way. The folks who have been underrepresented, the LGBTQ plus IA, every other group which DEI has really worked hard to try to elevate are having a different experience in the workplace than many of those who are marginally, who are the majority, and sometimes we talk about underrepresentation. I also talk about overrepresentation, right? That the groups who are overrepresented because they were included early on and because of external societal inequities are the ones who are enjoying most of the best experience. Now, when DEI is done correctly, and I want to acknowledge that sometimes it's not done correctly, but when it is done correctly, it's about everybody. It isn't about one group. And the best thing that DEI did was to start to recognize all the types of differences and the different sort of locations that different groups are in. And as you said, Layla, diversity looks very different from country to country, but the concept of diversity, equity, inclusion is to look at difference, to figure out how to take advantage, in the best sense of the word, of those differences to create innovation and different perspectives and creativity, and to make sure that difference isn't a thing that prevents people from being able to be included and working at their best. And so, again, I think that what we're looking at is a red herring. People are thrown off. If you don't understand what diversity and equity is about, then you're buying into this idea that it's not about merit. But the truth of the matter is that the only way we can get to merit is to have initiatives and interventions which allow people of all backgrounds to thrive.
I love that we've got the emoji icons enabled, because there are claps, there are hearts. Right now, those in the communities that are diversity, inclusion, belonging, culture, whatever that means, wherever you may be around the world, are feeling pain. And sometimes it feels, yet again, we are here, yet again, we are here. But every time we come out the other side, and this is about pulling together, convening together, and really enabling diversity to thrive, whatever that may be, because it is a true commercial lever for economic growth and prosperity. And with those,
Layla, if we have time, I am happy to go further into like what companies can do and organizations can do, just more concrete things, because I think what you're saying is this is an opportunity. You got to be fairly positive right now in the United States to be like, this is an opportunity. But it is, and it is an opportunity for us to evolve and grow even more deeply in the work that we do around equity, belonging, diversity, and inclusion.
Mhm. Absolutely spot on, Vinay. As ever, thank you so much for your contribution. And we are going to be coming back to you on that very note. I'm coming across to Ray here. Now, Ray, for those that don't know Ray, and I know there are a number of you because we're seeing all the pings coming in from our team of Ray fans from BP and Barclays and such. Ray is, we're lucky to say, a special advisor to DAR Global, but also former Group Chief Diversity Officer for Barclays. There we go, Ray. Lots of little love hearts popping up here, which is fantastic. Um, Ray, you and I share what I will say is a dark sense of humour and an unwavering optimism at times of strife. And, much like Vinay, we're here musing because sometimes if we don't laugh, then we cry. And actually, this is the time to pull together. Talk to us about what you are seeing and what you're experiencing, especially being, relatively recently out of corporate world, but obviously wearing a number of hats and doing a whole raft of very, very interesting things. Speaking on, Black History Month as well, which again, I forgot to say at the start, but it is Black History Month over in the States.
Yeah, Layla, thanks again for inviting me and including me in this conversation. I do sometimes call myself an irrational optimist. I've had to dig pretty deep lately to get to that glass half full mindset. I do have reasons, though, that I think we should all be hopeful. I love listening to Renee. I always learn from her. I have to admit, I was listening this time for places where I might offer a slightly different view, and I couldn't. I'm actually really well aligned with all the things that we heard from Renee. There's a couple of points that I will amplify, though, in slightly different terms. And I'll start with what Renee said at the beginning of her comments, that she is surprised. She knew that President Trump said he was going to do this, and yet the extent of the actions that have taken place have been a bit surprising. I'll admit that I think I feel the same way, even though I have said many times in the last 3.5 weeks, it's amazing that he was inaugurated on the 20th of January. So it's not that long ago, but I have said many times he said he was going to do this. There's something I have to give him credit for. President Trump is a populist. I think that's a fair and an objective observation. I don't mean it as a pejorative. He's a populist and he is really good at it because what he's managed to do is create this narrative that DEI is a bad thing, a bad, bad thing. And it reminds me of the discussion just a few years ago around this thing that we called critical race theory. There are millions of people, I'd suggest to you, who are completely convinced that critical race theory was a horrible, horrible thing. The vast majority of them had no idea what it is, really. And I think the same thing is playing out even in DEI. And I loved Vernee's her suggestion that we ought to actually spell out the acronym, make sure we're clear what it is that we're talking about in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, all the elements of the acronym. There were some interesting observations just a week ago when Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed some anti-DEI provisions in the Capitol in the state of Texas. For those of you who don't know this, Texas Governor Greg Abbott uses a wheelchair. He manages to move around the Texas state capitol and do his job because of DEI in a way that maybe he misunderstands or overlooks, maybe takes for granted, but it's true. And Vernay mentioned the evolution of the breadth and scope of the work done inside DEI. It did start with civil rights. And in fact, there was an executive order rescinded by President Trump within his first few hours after being inaugurated on the 20th of January. It was an executive order that had been signed by President Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1964 as an immediate follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So the response and the actions being taken are not just about a recent sense of wokeness. They aren't just an argument about President Biden's policies. I'd argue they're not about Republican, Democrat. There's a conscious intent here. We need to be thoughtful and careful as we watch and we engage in the processes that are there for us to make sure our voices are heard. There's another truth that this language of DEI and it's the populist notion now that it's a bad thing. We really have to push hard on people's understanding of what it does, how it contributes, and how it actually creates value. I agree with Vernay that there are some DEI practices, some practitioners who haven't been true to the essence and the spirit of what it is that we meant to do. It was always meant to ensure that we are taking away roadblocks, not creating advantage for any groups, any individuals. There's a great cartoon that's been sort of resuscitated and floating around from Calvin and Hobbes. I call Calvin one of the great philosophers and thinkers of all time with his partner Hobbes. And if you are familiar with that cartoon, maybe you'll smile and you'll recognize that. But Calvin essentially says in this cartoon that DEI was never meant to cause minorities who were not qualified to get jobs over white people who were qualified. It was the opposite. It was to make sure that white people who were not qualified didn't get jobs over minorities who were very well qualified. And that's a slight paraphrase. I'm sure I didn't quote it precisely, but that's the spirit. And it leads me then to this theme of meritocracy. Um, like Vernay, I love it. In fact, that might be the central theme on which I agree completely with President Trump and the efforts that they are putting out, except we completely disagree about what meritocracy must mean and how we must achieve it. Here's my admonition to all of you to think about. We've been lied to for a very long time about what meritocracy is and what we must do to preserve it, and even the suggestion that DEI works against meritocracy. Here's the truth. The concept of meritocracy is that the best person should get the job every time. The only way to be certain that the best person gets the job every time is to know that you're drawing from the entirety of the available talent pool. If you are not drawing from the entirety of the available talent pool, you have no way of knowing if the person that you're going to choose is indeed the best person for the job. So we've got to reset our thinking, and we recognize that DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion is essential to creating any genuine, true, and sustainable meritocracy. We've got to be determined around that idea. Like Vernay, I do think there are things that companies can do, and we'll have a chance to talk more about that. But I'll leave you with this thought. The headlines are loud. The headlines are loud and noisy. And indeed, I bet maybe all of us here could name a, maybe a dozen companies who have said they're going to pull back from their DEI commitments. If you've studied it really closely and you've mined the internet, maybe you could get to 20. If you've mined the internet and looked hard, you might find at least as many of the same number of companies who have said, we're not pulling back. We know this creates real value. We know this matters in our ability to compete and perform as an enterprise. So take those numbers, which are loud and noisy, and set them against the FTSE 100 or the Fortune 500 and understand that it's actually a relatively small number of companies who have decided to go on record and make statements. The vast majority, I believe, and through my conversations and my travels, what I've found is the vast majority are very quietly just getting on with it. They know what matters. They know what drives value. They're not going to become lightning rods for litigation and attract unnecessary attention, but they're going to find ways to continue to ensure that they create a diverse and equitable and inclusive environment for their employees, for their investors, their stakeholders of every description. And I think that's the right choice to make.
Here, Ray. I think we must find somewhere or someone where we can agree to disagree on something, because I am conscious of the fact that we here are preaching to the converted and seeing, again, lots of love hearts, lots of claps here, which is absolutely wonderful. It is spirit that we need during these times. I'm going to come across now to the phenomenal Umran Beba, who I'd love off the back of everything that Vinay and Ray has shared for us to talk not only a little bit about talent, which I know is a subject that we share very much in common, especially given your role within August around the world of exec search and the fact that talent is everywhere. It really is. It just doesn't happen to necessarily be from all the representative backgrounds that we want to see at those levels within the corporate hierarchy. But Umran, for those who haven't had the opportunity to come across Umran, she has a tremendous background, former SVP and Chief Diversity and Engagement Officer for PepsiCo, and now sitting on a number of boards, including Bakkavor, for those who are in the retail and the FMCG space may well know it, listed business in the UK. Umran, across to you, my friend, as a true global citizen.
Thank you, Leila. And it was great to hear Werna and Ray, their points of view. So I want to talk about the starting point because I have a background of about 35 years in consumer goods. And the reason we cared about diversity to start with was because it was our consumers, customers, users. You have to represent them in your workforce so that, you have the right innovation, driving growth with the engagement of the workforce. So nothing changed. I think at the end of the day, we have to take care of our consumers, customers, users, and also communities, right? So if you don't represent them in your workforce, you are just doing stuff in the absence of that, I think, um, engagements, representation. So that fact is still there, number one. And I think in order to grow in a sustainable fashion in business with engagement, you have to represent your consumers, customers, users. So that's still there, didn't change. Now, and how do you really include them, create the engagement, the right culture, the belonging in the organization is something we cared before, we are still caring today, even more. I just came out of a risk management conference today. I was speaking there, and one of the top 10 risks globally is, as you know, is about talent. How do you retain talent, attract talent? There's a lot of also migration around the globe. So in order to attract and retain talent, we have to create the right culture in terms of engagement, belonging, in addition to the basic, of course, rights, the compensation benefits, etc., and the right environment, the mental well-being and all that stuff, right? So, I mean, these are the basic principles that we were focusing on. And now it's even more important since the pandemic. Every employee is looking for a better work environment, better, let's say, engagement, belonging. So that didn't change, but even became more important. So that's the second pillar, I think. And there are different laws and regulations around the globe in terms of equity practices and policies. If you are in the UK, you have to have your gender pay gap. If you are in France, you have to also talk about it and make sure you submit those reports. So I think the legal frameworks around the globe are different. And first of all, the practitioners should make sure, they understand the laws and regulations of their own country and apply to that or apply those. But in terms of engagement, inclusion, I think the principles that we were applying before are even more important today. And let's come to the performance side. I mean, every company today has some sort of a performance system, and the performance system is based on total, merit-based performance. And we were always making sure let's get the best system to see the performance of individuals, right? So it was not about your diversity characteristic, but it was about your performance. So the merit was there, merit will be there and should be there. I mean, I don't know why we are even talking about it. And what are the examples of, let's say, non-merit based assignments in the companies? We did not have it. But you have to make sure you have diverse slates for recruitment, you have diverse slates for promotions. If you don't see the pool, how do you get the best out of that pool? I think that's as simple as that. So around the globe, I think today there are also some strategic situations like, let's go to Saudi Arabia. It's growing very fast. Do you have the local talent? If you only focus on men, you don't have the local talent enough. So you have to bring in women. It is the strategic workforce. I mean, you need it. So you can't just ignore and say, okay, I just work with the traditional workforce. No, you have to train and encourage and bring that strategic workforce to the companies and governments and all that stuff, to the system. So it is the reality of talent needs, workforce, strategic workforce needs. So you have to look at the pool, the total pool, get the best, and integrate all of these principles of diversity, equity, inclusion into your HR practices, customer practices, supply chain. So these are not separate things we are doing on the side. Maybe that was the mistake. For many years, we were seeing, or some people were seeing it as a side activity. It is time to integrate these into our practices in HR, practices in supply chain, in every customer, let's say, conversations. So it is a mindset change, which is linked to the overall culture question. It is driven by the CEO, it is driven by the C-suite, but it is the DNA of the organization where you see all these practices in everyday conversations, everyday performance reviews, customer management. So if I don't respect my customer because they are different, you're in trouble. So I think that's the mindset we need. It is the integration of D&I principles into everyday acts. And how do you really make sure this culture is enhanced with everybody's effort? So what I would say overall, talent is a major risk around the globe. It's an opportunity as well. So let's make sure we attract and develop the right talent for the best culture. And if you want to create a difference, competitive edge, we need the whole pool for our talent base. And we need to have the best performing out of that pool with the right cultural approach. Therefore, I think we need to underline that performance-based, integrated cultural practices are what we are looking at today, which was also the reality in the past. But today we need to kind of underline it, integrated everywhere. This is not anymore a side activity. So whatever some people are saying, in the high leagues in governments, I think they should, I mean, I would call it more political, and I would really focus on like, okay, as a business owner, as a business leader, I have to grow my business and I need the best talent. I need the whole pool and a respectful environment, integrated practices, period. I think that's what I'm seeing and what I'm suggesting to all of our leaders, not only in HR, D&I, but all the leaders in business. That's what we need to do. Thank you.
Omran, thank you so much. And I will take a small pause just to say we can see so many questions coming in. Thank you so much. We are going to be coming to them when we get to the hour. I've seen many familiar I was going to say faces then, but obviously I can't see any of you. I can see many names that are there. Carlos Cubia, who formerly at Walgreens and friend to a couple of us here on the panel. Also Alini Santos, who is a former Chief Diversity Officer for Unilever. We will come to you shortly at the end. But Omran, that was super valuable. Absolutely superb. I think really, the point here is talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not, a famous phrase that many of us have heard, but equally, this is mile wide and it is mile deep. So from supply chain diversity, right the way through to engaging and retaining talent as a risk mitigation factor, this is a golden thread that weaves across everything. Now, a number of you have been asking in the chat and in the questions that you've sent in over email, which we will come to as many of those as we can shortly. We're just about to come across to Margot Slattery, who has joined us, another global citizen. We have many global citizens here today. Margot, your perspective around case studies and the fact that ultimately ISS, which is the organization you work for, a global organization all around the world, servicing many organizations, who's continuing to prioritize this as key initiatives. Be fascinating to hear your view. For those, again, by way of introduction, who do not know the fabulous Margot Slattery, huge LGBTQ plus IA ambassador, and also the global head for diversity, inclusion, and social sustainability for ISS. Margot, coming across to you. And I think that you may be in France or possibly in Dublin, but you're in different places whenever we speak.
Thanks, Leila, and really lovely to join you today. And I'm speaking from Dublin, and apologies, I'm on my phone. I had some challenges getting into Zoom today. Technology doesn't always work for me. Anyhow, a little bit about, I suppose, the ISS perspective, and then maybe a bit more going back to some of the conversation I heard there with Umran. We're a company of about 330,000 people globally, and part of a big extended ecosystem, headquartered in Denmark. And I think that really helps us through some of this current crisis, because the values around equality and belonging and kindness have always been as part of the Danish way of life, and being part of the Danish ethics, etc. And therefore, from a point of view of our CEO and our ex-com and our board, when we had a discussion about, I suppose, all of these things that have been happening over the last couple of months, not just weeks, but months, and particularly the last couple of weeks, when we asked about, if we were going to have to change or to do something different, which wasn't necessarily the way we wanted to go, our CEO said straight away, why would we do anything different? The values are the values and the behaviors are the behaviors. Obviously, we have to adopt to the markets we're in, and that is most definitely something we will do that. But I mean, offering support and standing up for our people is still part and parcel of what we do every day. And I wanted to talk maybe about a few things that, pick up on the last things that Umran said, which was really around, we have the same people, give or take people, we have turnover and things change in our organization, but we have the same people working for us 6 months ago as we have today. We have the same type of people coming from all the different backgrounds, etc. We have to be a company that embraces all of that. This morning, for instance, we had a webinar with the wonderful Kate Nash, OBE from the UK, talking around disability. And we talked around 20% of our, quite likely 20% of our population, because we don't know exactly, are people with disabilities. That hasn't changed. So we will still be the same company that is supporting those people today, tomorrow, and into the future. So that doesn't change from our perspective. I would say that one of the benefits of being a global company is that we can offer that international support. So whether it's our teams from Europe, whether it's our teams in, if it's for our teams in the US, if it's our teams from Asia Pacific, but all around the world. And we also work with many partners like you at Dial, who help us when we have those moments and we need to talk to somebody, and when we're feeling a little bit, oh my God, what's happening here? We talk and we interact with our partners. And our partners have been fantastic over the last couple of weeks to help us to kind of understand the landscape a little bit more. And I guess one of the things about having a global perspective is that you don't always get weighed down by just one part of the globe. You can see the benefits of what's happening. And again, like Umran spoke to, in our business, I see so many good things happening in other parts of the world as well. So it's not all just one story. That doesn't underlie the pain and the suffering and the challenges that people are going through, and particularly many communities. I think the role of leaders is incredibly important, Leila. That's where CEOs, this is the time where we have to listen to the silent and listen to what's unsaid. But remember, being always right isn't the same thing as winning. It's not about being right or wrong. There are different ways of looking at this. This is about where leaders show themselves up and around what they support. So what are we supporting financially? So for instance, this year, our teams and the work that we're doing around social sustainability, which incorporates our work around diversity, inclusion, and belonging, has had extra resources put around it. So that's where a leader shows up. A leader shows up in sending bios and being in our town halls around that. And that effective leadership doesn't stop just one day. It's continually promoting that diversity across everything we do. And we look at this across all of our systems. So from the time a person looks at a role in ISS right through to retire or whatever the stages in somebody's journey is. And I suppose the last couple of things I think about, you asked me when we were chatting about this, about the predictions and think what's happening into the future. I don't know that I can say that because the world is in such a state, but there are no doubt we're made up by human beings. And I go back to the UN charters and about human rights. And it's human beings that work here and work in our organization. And whilst we might use robotics and lots of those things, we're servicing and supporting our placemakers at the end of the day. And it's keeping that in mind and thinking about, it's kindness, it's good behaviors and good values. So I'll come back to you, Leila, because I know that time is precious, but they're just some quick thoughts for you.
Margot, thank you so much. And I can see perfectly timed that James Felton Keith, affectionately known as JFK, has joined us. We thought we'd lost you there for a moment, James, but Margot, thank you so much. And what is really, not any grounding, but on that personal note, we are all human. It is that time where, and look, we've been here before, we'll be here again, we'll get through the other side. But it just feels that moment where, the tide's going out and we can kind of see who's naked. That makes sense. And we know who is practicing what they preach, who is doing what they say, but obviously ensuring that we do this within the realms of the fact that actually this is not a simplistic one-sided viewpoint. This is something which is deeply complex, actually, but at the same time very simple. We are all humans, and humanity matters more than anything. Kindness, compassion, etc., all incredibly important. Yet at the same time, given legalities and legislation and some of the things that we're obviously seeing, particularly coming out of the States, how can organizations galvanize and protect themselves and do what they need to do in the creative way that only diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, culture practitioners can? With that, thank you, Margot. And coming across to James Felton Keith. Now, James is the CEO of Inclusion Score. He is the chair of the Global DEI Standard, first Black LGBTQ plus IA person for Congress, and also a published author, as I know a number of you are here on our esteemed panel. James, I'd love to come to you now on data, one of my very favorite subjects. Data. Let's talk a little bit more about what you're seeing.
Sure. Well, I think first, hello everybody. How you doing? Hi, Umran.
Hi.
Everyone. I've known her for a few years. I'm a fan, and quite a fan of everyone else. Apologies, I was on the wrong link, but listening to everyone speak, and I agree across the board. But with regards to data and my work at Inclusion Score, I'm an insurance professional. I think outside of politics, I work in the insurance industry, and we leverage insurance, in particular the people in London town. The Lloyd's market is maybe the biggest market maker of how we price talent across the globe and how we price the risk around talent across the globe. I don't know that people speak elaborately or maybe even plainly enough about what insurance is. In insurance, we do two things, in that trickles right into our lives. We secure life and property. That's it, life and property. But in the modern era, our lives, or the digital versions of our lives that we track to validate what some of the panelists have talked about here, the markets that cater to all of our lives, that data has become property as well. And if you listen to the President of the United States and his executive orders and contrast that with the CEOs at Davos 2 weeks ago, they're all constantly talking about how the data revolution and the technological and AI revolution that we're living through is requiring that we be deliberately equitable and inclusive of more and more people. It's just the only way that we see the possibility of distributing peace, as much of it as we can across the globe. And so my work outside of inclusion score and the standardization of how we deliver diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as a business process is I've also recently published a book called Data is Labor. And it is where we're looking at the E in DEI and B, or the equity in DEI and B, and trying to understand how we quash some of the seemingly innate xenophobia and hate that we've seen not only in the United States of America, but across Latin America and Africa and Europe and Asia and the Middle East, and you name it. We really think that a lot of angst from communities across the globe comes from a lack of economic access to all of the material fruits that they might see around them. And so we think that in this data-driven era and in this technologically driven era, the next conversation around people's value is income separately from wages. I know that, as humans, we're constantly talking about people's wages. We're talking about whether it's the wage gap between women and men, whether it's between any minority group in every country. And I'll just say for the people in the US who are thinking about, white folks and what Donald Trump is saying, I see a nearly identical thing happening in India with the Hindu population. I just got off the phone with a delegation of folks who are suing Foxconn for telling women in Chennai that they don't hire married women. And so this is a global issue specific to majorities in power and minorities that we absolutely need to employ across any locale, because there just aren't enough men of a particular cultural ilk in any corner of the earth to make the economy go around. And so as I am in San Francisco today, it is a little bit after 8 a.m. So apologies, my voice is a bit raspy from last night because I was given a keynote, but it was more of a series of arguments. I'm a bit loud and I yell a lot with technology leaders here about the fact that we have to start calculating a dividend for people's input to productivity in order to have a new conversation with the human population about how valuable they are to the things that we've started to automate around them, and make it separately from wages. And so the last thing I'll say, because I feel like I'm over talking here, to wrap it all in, I'd like to define productivity for all of your listeners, Layla. If you go to the Americans Bureau for Labor Statistics, or just the Department of Labor, productivity is defined as a measure of inputs. And all of you all's data, personal data, things about you, where we know what kind of products and or services, or what we call goods, we can distribute to you. That is an input to our ability to quickly, effectively, and efficiently distribute those products and or services. And we're getting to the point where we are starting to consider how we indemnify people for the input that we've already used from them to create productive products and services. And that's a conversation about equity. I think even though we have been, as a global community, talking about human rights since the end of World War II and the beginning of the International Organization for Standards and the United Nations, and maybe for the past 60 years, talking about civil rights and human rights from the American context with the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which is still in place. Title VII is still in place. The 14th Amendment is still in place. It is still illegal to discriminate against anyone or retaliate against anyone. Companies just have to be a bit more deliberate and diligent about how they document what they're doing. And there's a process for that. But as we move forward, we are starting to morph our conversation around people's value from just wages alone, which are essentially a retainer for your time, to discuss what are you owed if you come to the table of productivity, you give us some of your time, which we'll retain you for, that's a wage. And then that productivity scales. People need to not only have tangible representation of their value, but political and business leaders need to be able to communicate how valuable they are, to tell them why they are getting both the wages that they're getting and the tangential income that they may be receiving from a very productive product or service, especially as we move into automation. So my work is really rooted at the crux of deliberate equity inclusion and, you know, where the money is. As an insurance professional, we try to engage the global community of business leaders to help them understand that if they fail to properly distribute value across their employees and their consumers and their stakeholders, chaos can ensue. And we've seen that over and over and over again throughout human history. And we would like to avoid it or mitigate that risk, if you will. So that's where I am. That's what I do at Inclusion Score. I write a bunch of books and give a bunch of rants, but it's nice to be here.
James, thanks so much. And before we move into questions, which we'll do in just a moment, and I have to ask for forgiveness here as opposed to permission to all, is there are so many questions coming in from various different places. I'm going to apologise and say we're not going to be able to answer everything. But may I just quickly ask, James, you know, one of the things that I found particularly fascinating is something... It's something that you said, I think, in one of your previous keynotes, and I think it's something that probably everyone on this panel believes, is that those who operate in this world of diversity and inclusion, modern day diversity, inclusion, and belonging, CEOs and executives, in particular those in positions of influence, need to have a heart of a social worker, yet also the mind of a CEO. And this inflection point balance that we're seeing, I think, is really, really fascinating, because we did see at a time post George Floyd that companies were trotting out proudly chief diversity officers and such, and now conveniently trotting back on many things that we have seen. And so it's curious to me that the industry is starting to almost, you know, go through a bit of a, you know, a bit of a differentiation now in terms of levels of skill set. Does that make sense?
No, it does. I think, again, as someone who just studies, you know, corporate culture, outside of being a mechanical engineer, macroeconomist, I think my real profession over the course of the past 15 or so years has been rooted in corporate ethnography. And I think this is just a natural occurrence of any fledgling industry. You know, one of our earliest co-founders and investors at Inclusion Score was a woman who created employment law. Her name is Dawn Bennett Alexander. That was only a little bit more than 40 years ago. She's still around. She's a slightly retired law professor at the University of Georgia. But she really started using Title VII of the Civil Rights Act to sue for workplace discrimination and retaliation. And it has made a market in London of directors and officers insurance and employment practice liability insurance, where we've now put a price on a lack of inclusivity. And over 40 years, we've had well-meaning leaders distribute and self-identify micro portions of the both employee and consumer ilk. And now with this substantial pushback from conservatives, which will not work, it is not enforceable. We just had a big win in federal court, for anyone who's not familiar, 4 days ago, where a federal judge threw out a case on anti-DEI versus the city of Seattle. So every municipality in the United States and every state in the United States has First Amendment rights to do whatever they want with regards to engaging people around deliberate equity and inclusion. But to your question, Leila, I think what we see in this market is that the old fledgling industry, the last 40 years of kind of ad hoc DEI services, is morphing into something more professionalized and standardized. And I think it's actually an opportunity. I think companies having a business process-based approach to actively engaging their employees and their consumers first, creating feedback mechanisms. Those are like employee resource groups, second, and then leveraging those feedback mechanisms to, again, better engage those communities, whatever they may be. Third is the way forward. It both protects the company from liability. If I think about the $25 million suit that Starbucks settled on for reverse discrimination, which is not a word, by the way. It's like saying irregardless, which is also not a word. It's redundant. It's not necessary. But my point is, Starbucks paid a white man $50 million because he said they were discriminating against him for hiring Asian women in Denver. But if Starbucks just had a mandate per their Asian Women's Employee Resource Group that they were going to hire and engage them because they are a part of their consumer and worker community, they could have gotten rid of that lawsuit for, I don't know, maybe $25,000 in just regular legal fees instead of paying that guy $25 million. So the process with which we deploy DEI is changing. And then now the incentives to do that are actually in our favor. The fact that the President of the United States is going to use the Department of Justice to investigate and potentially sue everyone, it makes the price of doing business higher. Because when Lloyd's and Zurich and Chubb and AIG and others look at your employment practice liability costs, they're going to look at the reverse discrimination people who cannot read, and the regular discrimination people who know that irregardless is not a word. And they're going to put them together and say, the price of you doing business is the price of both of those lawsuits now, not just the one that say you discriminated against that original woman. And so it gives us more incentive to go into more countries and more companies. We're in 32 countries and about 500 companies. I do not beg CEOs to have a conscious mind. I don't ask them to be a subject matter expert about diversity, equity, inclusion, or a philosopher. That's my job. They probably can't do my job as well as me. They're engineers or lawyers or accountants. So we just tell them what to do. And what I think, to wrap it up, is that this profession, being a diversity inclusion professional or something similar to it, will look a lot like a chief information officer looked at the end of the 90s. Back in the day, the CIO was a guy, it was usually a guy, who knew where the copy machine and the fax machine was. And then in the 2000s, he inherited a portfolio of hardware and software that was subject to change management. I think we'll start to see chief diversity officers go that route. I think it will become more rigorous. I think it'll be tied to insurance premiums and legal risk. And I think it is, by and large, a good thing. But companies cannot afford to turn their backs on the willing to work population, because they're just, number one, if we forget about all the various diversity groups, and there are 27 protected classes that we would classify as a diversity group, just 27. I just think about the one that matters the most, the biggest one, women in the workforce. There are not enough men to do all the work. And in most Western countries, and I'm going to include the BRICS in there now, so China, India, South Africa, South Korea, women read better and they count better than people who look like me. And they have more education than people who look like me. And unfortunately, as the pay gap has widened in the past 24 months, you can hire a woman to do a job better than me at about a 25% discount. So it makes no sense to hire me or Ray. I know that pisses a lot of people off. I'm not sure if saying the word pisses is me cursing right now, but I typically curse a lot. I want to apologize.
Okay. And those who work in this industry, who love it, care about it, do have what we started the conversation with talking about, is a rather fabulously dark sense of humor, because I think it's very, very important. Now, James, Ray, I knew that you get on like house on fire. In fact, I knew that the same would be true for everyone on this panel. Ray also is an engineer by trade. So Ray, I'm going to come across to you, because I think what's really important, and I promise you, everyone, we will come to questions questions after this. I promise we're going to go now into a panel very shortly. But just quickly, I'd just love to flesh out that point around standardization and professionalization and what we've seen this role of the Chief Diversity Officer evolving. So Ray, I'm going to come to you. Whilst you're unmuting, I will just say, you know, looking back a couple of years, we saw about 50% of Chief Diversity Officers reporting into CHROs within the Fortune. I think that's a fair, you know, bit lower, I would hazard a guess out now. But ultimately, we are seeing this professionalization like any other business strategy. But Ray, I'd love you to just touch on that for a moment, and then I promise we will go into questions. I know there's a number of people who have had their hands up being very, very patient, so we will come to you in just a moment. Ray.
Yeah, Leila, thanks. I do see some great questions, and I'm biting my tongue because there are things I really want to make sure that we don't leave out. But as you say, I knew there was a reason I liked JFK, and we are both engineers by background, and I can see and hear that thought process and the way that he's talking through these issues. There is a truth, and Vernay actually raised this at the very start. There are some who have not really gone about this in the way that's completely aligned to the spirit of what we all aim to achieve. We don't actually want anyone to be hired or promoted because they are different by whatever dimension of difference. What we want is to make sure that everybody is in the pool and seen and has the opportunity to be hired, to progress, or to get the pay rise, whatever it is. And that's got to be then rooted in our careful understanding and analysis of the data. What I advocate all the time is you have to have a clear assessment and understanding of where you are. You have to use that to identify where there are gaps. Then you need to be really intentional about what you will do. And that evolution and that practice and thinking is what I think guides the professionalization in this diversity, equity, and inclusion space. Remember that President Trump's executive orders from the 20th and the 21st, they essentially said, we don't like illegal DEI. That's my paraphrase. Well, I don't know anybody who's doing anything that they think is illegal DEI. So it's important to try to frame what the heck do we think he meant by that. I believe that what the administration is going after are preferences, set-asides, special programs that are open only to particular groups. And this is a space where I do think it's wise to do things so as to not make yourself a lightning rod for litigation and attention. And so it's something that we started to do while I was still in Barclays, and it's still my encouragement and advice to all companies that I talk with. Examine the things that you're doing and make sure that you don't have things that will draw that kind of attention, even if you're 100% certain that it is not illegal DEI. There are some companies who are worried they have to stop doing anything that looks or sounds or smells like DEI. There are some companies who seem to believe they cannot do inclusive hiring. That's not right. That is not true. If you go and you look across the entirety of the available talent pool and you choose the best person for the job, and it's not underneath an umbrella or a label of DEI, there is no way for any organization, any entity, the Department of Justice or President Trump himself to come and say that you're doing something wrong. So this is the chance for organizations who really believe in the value created by more diverse and equitable and inclusive practices. This is the chance for you to just do it. You don't need the banner. You don't need the headline. I'm even open now to the idea that it's okay to change the language. You don't have to call it the same thing. That language is now, it's become an attention getter in a way that may not be helpful. At least spell it out like Vernay advocated for us at the very beginning. But if you have to call it something different and you just do it and you demonstrate your commitment through the actions and the results, I think you will still find that there's much opportunity to create the outcomes that you want.
Right, thanks ever so much. I'm going to just give thanks and gratitude for all of the people that have written in. We had over 100 questions. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to summarize some of the questions that we did have. And then I'm going to answer. I've been dying also, like yourself, Ray, to answer some of these questions that have been coming in. And we've a lot of people asking questions which deserve a provocative answer. And so, Vinay, I'll be coming to you as well shortly, as well as Umran. So we had questions from the audience, namely, and we kind of categorize them into a number of groups. So a lot of people are asking about backlash against DEI and political influence. Some people are saying, will there be consumer-led rebellion against brands rolling back DEI? Do we sense some of a shift? A number of these things we have covered, including things like how the new administration has changed diversity in your company. So perhaps something that we can touch on in our questions. Business risk. A number of people have asked about business risk and strategy for DEI, and so I'm hoping that actually a number of these questions have been answered. But one of the things that is coming out a lot is, should we have a rebrand? And Vinay, I know that's something that we've spoken about a lot, so perhaps something to touch on there. And then also evolution over time. So Vinay, I'm going to come across to you, take your pick from any of these questions, and then we have got a couple of people that need to drop off who I will pop up to the stage if I can, or it may just be that I allow them to answer live. Don't know if anyone here has ever been on the old school Clubhouse where you can kind of bring people up and they can talk, but I plan to do that. So Vinay, coming to you on positive controversies.
First of all, I just want to say that James gave me so many things to think about. I don't even know you, James, but that has clearly been a problem on my part. And I am dying to hear more, because so many of the people who are talking about risk somehow have this one-sided version of what the risks are and not looking at the other side, which is, hey, you still can't be part of illegal discrimination the way it has been defined for many decades, not the weird version of it. As you said, there is not reverse discrimination. And I'm glad you set us straight about irregardless. But one of the things that I'm worried about, and I don't use worried very often, so I'm concerned is what I'm going to say, is that the efforts to get rid of set-asides, in addition to set-aside, so set-aside was like, we're going to pay attention to this group of people that have been historically excluded from getting contracts and opportunity, because that whole area has been sewn up. And, a lot of people know that I was at Netflix, and entertainment is like that, right? There's this very, very tight club of people, and the government has been like that. That's where affirmative action came from in the United States, which is like, let's affirmatively invite folks who have not been allowed at all to present what they are capable of, and we even had like set aside, let's like make sure that 80%, it was like 10% of the contracts of the entire federal government are actually targeted. Okay, so those were programs that clearly are going to be challenged. But the programs that are really worrisome to me, based on my own personal experience, is the kind of pipeline, mentoring, the kinds of programs where you actually notice that women are being discriminated against as they move up, right? Because so much of their success is about informal access to mentors, sponsors, opportunity, like the highest risk kind of opportunities. But we had created some programs that were like, okay, these people don't even know this job exists. Why don't we go out and try to identify a whole new population of people who may not have access to us, so that we can get to the fullest group of talent. I love what was said, Ray, about like, you got to, and also I think Umran said this too, is like, you got to get to the whole talent pool. But the way things are set up right now, we still know that it's very hard to get to the whole talent pool. I am where I am right now, sadly, because Martin Luther King was assassinated when I was around 8 years old, and all of a sudden things started opening. I could go to whatever school I wanted, wherever I was in the city. I got invited to go to math programs. I took a special like program for Black kids who want to learn about journalism. Those opportunities were so important to my exposure, my connection, my networks, and my ability to actually be prepared and ready to take on the larger corporate world. And so when I see people backing up, and I understand why they're doing that, but when I see them backing up from the money that they are putting into certain groups that haven't had access, I get really worried. When I see affirmative action being eliminated in secondary education, I get really worried. How are people going to get to these places that have been very much about a certain group of people having access? And so I just wanted to put that out there. And then the last thing I wanted to say is I saw a lot of questions about what do we say about this and how do we mention this and how do we talk about the politics and all of that. I saw that. And I just want to say this is like a little bit of a commercial word, but I am going to do a webinar just on that and a seminar, just like, what do you say? How do you say it? And how do you say it in a way that keeps the conversation flowing versus taking people down and shaming and blaming? Because if there was any mistake that maybe we fell into in DEI is too much blame, shame, and attack. And I think those are in the questions too, and not figuring out how to utilize allies. So I'm actually going to do like a whole workshop project conversation about talking points, and then most importantly, talking questions, because a lot of times we just need to figure out where people are coming from. Like, what is that? Why do you ask that? Or why do you think that? Or how have you come about that information? Which I think people really need that kind of grace projected as they are trying to figure out where they're going to come out in this whole controversy. I'm sorry, that was a long thing. I'm so sorry.
No. It is absolutely fine. I'm going to try and bring up a couple of panelists here, and I saw Eleni Santos, amongst others, who had their hands up when Umran was speaking before. So Umran, I'd love to come across to yourself here, and then I'm going to see whether, let me see my multitasking skill here.
Maybe while you do that, I can just say a few things, and then you bring up, one of the participants. So I think the name was mentioned a lot. So I was just remembering my title before I left or retired from PepsiCo. It was Chief Diversity and Engagement Officer. Even in those days, we were really focusing on the whole idea of engagement beyond inclusion even. So this is the talent diversity scarcity situation, right? So we need to focus on talent development, talent engagement. So whatever you want to call it, it should really touch those points about talent development, engagement, and culture. And in order to have that, you need to have the diversity, inclusion, equity, and integrate it into all of the HR processes, as I mentioned before. So it really depends on how the company wants to approach it. But if you are working with the federal government, yes, you have to take some actions. But beyond that, the companies who are not, I mean, basically they don't need to make these changes, and just watch out the talent, the young talent. They will definitely question before they join, while they join, and when they are in the workforce. Today, they are very conscious on the ESG attributes. It's the E, it's the S, and the G, right? So if we don't show them how, as a company, we are dealing with these social issues or environmental issues, governance issues, they will question, and they will basically make decisions if they have different alternatives using these attributes. So D&I and the whole idea of, talent focus, social issues, community impact, social impact, we have to make sure we have these programs lined up to attract the talent, especially the new and young, generations coming into the workforce.
Yep.
So with that, I would pass back to you, Leila, if you have a participant who wants to ask a direct question.
I will do. Thank you so much. And I think we've got some very valid points there. I mean, it is 5 generations, nearly 6 generations in the workplace. And so ultimately, how can we deny the things that are important? I do worry about the future generations of leaders. So we had Carlos Nalini, who have jumped off, as have Margot. Carlos did send his regards, but says he needs to hop to another call relative to the executive orders on gender affirming care. And we are seeing, this is pretty typical as well. We're seeing diversity officers, executives being pulled in multiple different directions at the moment. And so doing our best to support everyone. I know that we've got quite a few people from Jaguar Land Rover here, including Paul, Paul, I'm hoping that you are able to ask your question live now to the team. Paul, can you hear me? Now click the button that says you would like to answer this question live. And I'm hoping that that is possible, but it may not be. Paul, can you hear me?
Can you hear me now?
There you are, Paul. Paul
Excellent.
Alcott from Jaguar Land Rover here in the UK. May you ask your question, please, to the panelists?
Yeah, what a wonderful panel it's been, and a great webinar. Thank you to all for your time and your openness. I think your vulnerability as well. It's been enlightening. Ray, your point caught me the most. Your point around organisations in the FTSE 100, Fortune 500, large global companies. One of those, Tesla, seems to have had a bit of backlash most recently in the last 24 hours, maybe. If I didn't love Sheryl Crow before with her musical talent, I love her even more now for the action that she has taken. And I liked your reference around the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon reference. One today I spotted a meme around Tiananmen Square of that individual stood in front of a load of Tesla Cybertrucks, which is equally interesting. I guess my question is, for those individuals that are taking that positive action, it's almost like voting with your feet or taking a real positive stance against those organisations that have made their positions clear on their diversity, equity and inclusion policies. How do we use that as a ripple effect to create some positive conversation and sort of avoid the opportunity of going into a polarised space and again, creating more of a divide? How do we use it positively to show this is an important topic that is globally needed to have a fair voice and not be silenced?
Well, it's a great question. I'm glad you asked. It's great to hear from you. And I'll offer a quick view. I'd love to hear input from Renee and James. So I saw the little clip of Sheryl Crow waving to the tow truck as her Tesla was being taken away. And it reminds me that alongside what I said earlier about President Trump being a populist and the power of social media, I'm not convinced that we need much of an organized effort. I think the power of social media to amplify these individual actions in a way that becomes clear that it's a broad reaction and response. I think people will notice that. They'll pay attention to it. Perhaps there's things that will evolve and grow as more concerted and coordinated actions over time. But I think the power of social media in today's world to give a platform for every individual that then connects and assembles as a sort of a broader movement is what we can rely on and expect. And I think if Sheryl Crow gets lots of views and lots of likes, there's no doubt we'll see others that will follow suit, and that will send a strong message.
Yeah. I'd just like to chime in. I agree. I don't know that it'll be coordinated. I know I'm aware of a few initiatives that have already started. There's a boycott initiative here in the United States targeting companies that have backed away or suggested that they're backing away from at least DEI language. I want to be clear about that. We don't see in the data anyone actually pulling back. One company leaving the Human Rights Campaign Index is not a deletion of DEI per se. Again, some of this is dog and pony to avoid litigation from the US. But with regards to individuals or groups of individuals leaving certain brands, it's also an opportunity that we always already see in the market. And I'd like you all to think about, for instance, LVMH's Fenty brand, which is Rihanna, if you all are familiar, the pop star's underwear brand. When I'm in New York and I ride the subway, I see adverts for women of all different sizes and all different colors. And they pay, there's a Harvard Business School case study on this, about a 16% premium to feel more affirmed by that brand than the old Fruit of the Loom underwear. So something as crass as underwear and identifying our consumers, whether they're this new, the newer generations coming into the workforce or anyone else, it is a seemingly innate thing to leverage people's personal data, understand who they are, to give them products and services that they feel affirmed by. And as CEOs of companies take political stances like Elon is doing, it will differentiate and disrupt the market. I know that people in Dearborn and Detroit are probably excited about this and trying to figure out what kind of EVs they can offer to the world, but we will see that across the board. I think we see a significant dent starting in Target and how people engage with Target stores. When I actually look at their strategies on moving away from DEI, it doesn't look like they're really moving, but their communications was a problem. Last thing I'll say about this is we track DEI professionals, about 47,000 of them across the web at Inclusion Score, and we see that about 70% of them have journalism and communications backgrounds. I think that number needs to scale and how we train people to do the tactical operational thing. But those communication professionals also need to understand the impact and use of their words because, yeah, we're all on social media now. We're paying attention. And Sheryl Crow will send ripple effects through the auto market. Yeah.
JFK, thank you so much. I'm not sure whether we do still have Carlos here, actually. Forgive me, Carlos, if I skipped across you. I'm just going to see whether we can have
I think I'm here. Can you hear me?
You are. You said that you were leaving. And I
Yeah, he was. But
you.
I couldn't listen. It's hard to pull away from this amazing panel, man. Renee, good to see you. I can see you. You can't see me, but I can see you. Ray, my man, and JFK, a new guy I just met today, but we got to talk. But anyway, I wanted to ask the panel, any one of them, this whole notion of organizing. What I saw immediately after the executive orders was organizations making decisions based on what they think were going to happen. Because an executive order is just that. It's not law. It hasn't changed anything. It's just directionally sending a message of what they want to do. And then organizations were changing their stance based on that. What I've seen is the other side of that risk coin where folks are starting, what I'm going to call the silent majority starting to speak up and creating waves. And we're now seeing organizations backpedaling on their, walking away from DEI. They're now saying, no, we're committed because now the other voice is speaking up. So I think there is some value in doing this in a coordinated effort for the majority of the folks that still support DEI is to speak up and talk about the value and why it's important. We were letting the other side create our narrative. So talk to me about how should we organize and how should we come together to use our collective voice to show that this is still important work and that we're not going to back down.
Carlos, thank you so much. I am quickly, because I know that her battery is about to go, or at least this is what the team have said. Going to do 2 questions and then actually you can both answer. I should have known that this would run over. I think, keep it going, keep it going. I promise we'll do another. Can I just also ask, and Carlos, thank you so much, my friend. Siobhan from Odeon, may you ask your question as well before your battery goes? And for those that don't know Odeon, it's also over in the States, AMC. So big cinema group. Siobhan, are you there? And then we'll throw out both questions and comments to our fabulous panelists.
Yes, I'm here. Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes, Siobhan, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much for the last 90 minutes. It's been incredible and incredibly thought-provoking, and thank you for the opportunity to share my question. And it was around just a little bit to what you said earlier, Vernay, in terms of some of the tangible kind of pieces, how companies are addressing the impact of those recent political shifts within their teams. As Lady said, we're AMC is our parent company. We operate across multiple countries in Europe. So those questions are coming thick and fast in terms of that impact that will trickle down potentially into teams.
Siobhan, thanks so much, and hopefully you can flip over to another device. But for everyone who has been asking, don't worry, this is going over to YouTube. We will share recording, summary, everything like that afterwards. So Vinay, and then perhaps Umran, Ray, James, feel free to chip in on both.
Yeah, I think Carlos's point is well taken in the sense that I don't know if I don't blame any company for sort of what they did. I feel I started actually having a lot of sympathy because it was fast and furious, and it was hard to know exactly what to do. But I think what most companies have learned, and the communications was a problem, like a lot. But what I think most companies have sort of settled down now, and they're doing what every company needs to do, which is to talk to their lawyers, right? But what their lawyers need to do is to be the lawyers that enable the right things to continue to do for companies to follow their core values and to follow their commitment to the extent, the outright extent that they can. There may be a few things that need to be changed or put differently or held, right, or paused. But I think for all the reasons that people already talked about, this is not a winnable game to start going backwards to the 1950s. And I think what Umran is saying was really important as well, which is this is just about talent and engagement, and you have to think about who we are appealing to. I have seen lots of different pieces of hope. So for those out there who are feeling like completely like they don't want to get out of bed sometimes, I get it. Don't look at your phone, pray instead. But at least initially. But what I have seen is people who have been brought up in the ideals of the power of diversity and difference. And they are thinking of things like Sheryl Crow, which I like is brilliant. There's in the United States, there's a plan to boycott on the 28th, not just companies, just don't buy anything, just so that people could actually realize like what the market is for that. Sephora continues, for example, to just show different cues. It's sort of what James said about people who are appealing to different consumers. Like that's not going to stop. I'm loving looking at every streamer with the Black history. You're just like, what? They're going to take down that row now? You can't find certain movies that you want to find. So I think that luckily the integration has been happening. It continues to need to happen. And yes, professionalism is necessary, but we have to speak out. We have to not be too afraid to say diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging is the future. Accessibility, sustainability is our future. And so if we can continue to say that and explain why, I think we can get over this misinformation campaign and this nastiness.
Yeah. Leila, I have to leave soon, so let me say a few things and then thank you for the opportunity. I want to build on what Werner said. I think today we didn't talk about the US consumer. I mean, it is an incredibly diverse consumer base, and they have to really show their power in buying what they like, in terms of hearing what they like, and not what they don't like. So they have this power, and we have to really show as consumers, users, and make sure that, what we believe is reflected in our purchasing power. So that's, I think, step one in terms of being organized. The second one is having our voice wherever we can. This is an excellent start for this community, but how can we take this voice out of the 200 people here, and how can we go out and really have an organized message coming out of this session? I think is also critical, and repeat these type of sessions wherever we can, and have an organized point of view all together, I think, in a positive manner, positive fashion. So I am at your service, this team service, whenever we need to have our voice, we will have it. But let's use the power of consumption, the purchasing power, and our voice. I think in the beginning, we were all a little maybe perplexed. There was some silence, but now it's time to go out there and have our voice. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and great to meet you all. We'll be back with you, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you.
We will indeed. And Ron, thank you so much. We are massively over time, and I'm sure we'll be by just another 5 minutes, but we've got so many people still here. I'm literally going to take us through the last couple of slides and some of the summaries that we've seen, but do not worry, we will be doing another session very soon. Some of the observations that we've seen from a DAL Global perspective, certainly from our being able to support from our community, and behind the scenes, I have to say, DAL Global, the team, also August Leadership, who we are doing this webinar in partnership with, have been working very, very hard indeed in the background. So I want to say a big thank you as well for everyone and all on the respective teams for panelists who have had support, because we could not do this without you. We have seen a huge increase in terms of our hub activity. In fact, over 110%. 50% of our members are asking how support can be utilised for employee resource groups. We've also seen a lot of research around those who are working in the DEI space and being concerned over DEI. And so I really, really hope, if we move on to the next slide here, if we just pop onto the next slide. Lovely. Thank you very much. But really hope that this has refueled some of the much needed energy. I often feel myself that there is a need for filling up that cup, virtual cup, real life cup. Please do reach out. This is why we have this power of the community. This is about coming together now and convening and continuing to convene. As our panelists have said and reinforced, this is now a time for us to pull together. There might have been that shock factor moment, but actually this has been coming down the line when we look at data, when we look at insights, when we look at various different pieces of research, and everything from the wealth economy framework through to UN SDGs, diversity, data, so on and so forth. We know that this is here to stay. A lot of you have asked for resources. So from an August Leadership side, feel free to scan our QR codes. Our DAL Global Review, which features a number of our panelists and a whole plethora of case study is available. And this is a free open source piece of work that I tell you, a huge amount of work has gone into it, but it's the only piece of research in the entire world as we know it that looks at CEO-2, specifically that marzipan layer for those in the talent world, across holistic diversity, because whilst we may see at times some lies in the headlines, we know that the data doesn't lie. So actually, let's rest on that wonderful source that is data. And so resources we will follow up with. Thank you so much for the questions. We are really, really grateful. I want to say a big thank you to our panelists for all of those people who have contributed and asked many questions, but we will follow up. Hope that you have been refueled with some positivity and energy, because this is just the first of many, and actually we must stick together at these times. My name is Layla Mackenzie Dellis, founder and CEO of DAL Global. Thank you so much to the marvellous teams in the background again. Thank you to our panelists. I'm loving all of these emojis. We must do this again. So I'm going to say thank you, and we will be in touch. Ray, Vinay, James, Margot, who I know had to jump off, and Umran, You have been tremendous. We'll see you very soon.
Right.